director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development, on us getting out of the economic slump created by COVID-19. I know, Rob, you have a lot of great news and exciting things to share with us, right?
Certainly hope so, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here today and visit with you. I hate the fact that we have to do this online, but it's just the nature of our times, I think. But I do appreciate the opportunity to visit today. As Josh mentioned, it has been just one heck of a year. Obviously, I know you felt it in the energy industry as well. We've certainly seen it in our state's economy, but it is not all gloom and doom as it relates to, the economic development initiatives of our state. Think about where we were, think about kind of where we were at before this all started. The governor has really outlined an economic development strategy that I think is really fundamentally based on what matters in the economy. And there's all kinds of different discussion topics, and people kind of get excited about different things in economic development. But I fundamentally believe that if you do workforce development well, and if you do infrastructure development well, then those are really the fundamental building blocks of your economy. And frankly, those were the governor's priorities: workforce development, infrastructure. If anybody heard Governor Parson talk about economic development before the pandemic started, you heard those two words. And I think we're actually seeing the results of some of that really balanced approach paying off right now. So what I'd like to do today is kind of talk a little bit about where we have come in terms of our journey this year in the economy. Obviously, it's been an unprecedented year on just about every facet, but the recovery itself, talk about where we're at on that front, and really talk about where we're going from there. So just again, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the members of MEI. I know many of the folks that are on the board and involved in the organization are key supporters of economic development, and we appreciate the partnership. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So to start off with, Missouri was really doing well in economic development before the pandemic. For those who'd worked with us through our Best of Midwest initiative, you know that we set on a journey to fundamentally reset our entire approach to economic development. We had been falling behind other states. We needed to get more competitive, and I was really pleased to see that a lot of those needles were starting to move in our direction for the state of Missouri. Just before the pandemic hit, we had a historic high number of people in our state getting up and going to work every single day to earn a paycheck for their families. Nearly 3 million Missourians employed in our state. That's literally was historic highs. But then the bottom fell out for our state's economy. If you go to the next slide, the bottom fell out for obviously the state. We lost 345,000 jobs in our state almost overnight. And you can imagine the impact that has on families, on individual citizens, and certainly on the overall economy. We saw it in our consumer spending, which just dried up by a third just about in that springtime of 2020. It's hurting small businesses. It obviously is hurting communities. Many of the local governments in particular who depend on that local government tax revenue, the sales taxes, obviously all of this was hurting. But the backbone of any economy is a small business. In fact, something to the tune of nearly 80% of all the jobs in our state are in a small business. Those, that's where most people are working. And our state small businesses, the revenues dropped by nearly half, again, almost overnight. And so that was kind of the backdrop of where it is. I know the pandemic and the economic recession it caused affected different industries in different ways. And so this probably is not earth-shattering news to the folks on this call, but I thought it was worth kind of just level setting of really where we were in the spring. So if you can go to the next slide. The good news is that we're actually in the leading tier of states across the country in terms of the recovery. 63% of those 345,000 jobs that we lost have come back. So just tremendous job growth across the state. We have seen that start to slow down. For those of you who follow the jobs news every month, the latest jobs report from the national level, the federal government's jobs report shows that we're kind of seeing job growth returning to what we consider to be replacement level. So really kind of just flat job growth. But that is on the heels of several months of really strong job growth recovering from the pandemic. We talk a lot about it in our organization at the Department of Economic Development and across the administration as the state recovers from COVID-19, both on the public health side as well as the economic side. It's really two sides of the same coin. And so as we've seen cases rise into the late fall and to the early, kind of as we expect in the early winter, we've seen that job growth level off. But again, as you look at the entire economy, and as you look at the rest of the country, if you can go to the next slide, 63% of our jobs have come back. That's 16th in the nation, best in the nation for the recovery of those jobs. So obviously, we still have citizens who are hurting. We have citizens who are on unemployment as a result of COVID-19. But as you look at Missouri's situation relative to other states in the country, there's only 15 states that have recovered the jobs faster than we have. And I think that speaks really to the diversity of our economy to begin with. Missouri has an extremely diverse economy. We don't have all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. But that diversity, as well as, frankly, the balanced public policy approach that we've taken, I think has helped our state and the economy bounce back, more directly on that. If you take another look, you can go to the next slide, take another look at a key metric for us, because this has been a big topic of conversation. It's not just the jobs overall, but it's sort of the share of everybody that's working. And, we dropped 4.4% in our employment levels since the pandemic started. And so, again, it's not just the number of jobs that we're losing, or that we did lose, it's literally the overall levels. And this is kind of more of a relative measure. But again, if you look at the next slide, again, we're 16th best in the nation here as well for the return to employment levels. So the two things together, one is the actual jobs and recovering, and the other is kind of the return to your pre-COVID jobs levels, I think speaks to, again, the resiliency of our economy, certainly. Now, we know, and I'll show some slides here in a little bit, that there's still some spots in our economy that are struggling, and predominantly, we know that they're in the small businesses that are related to tourism in particular, and leisure and hospitality. But if you can go to the next slide, one of the things that I think shows, again, positive news as well, is that as the economy, early part of the spring, as we all stayed at home and were hunkering down, we stopped going to stores and stopped shopping and things like that, and consumer spending just bottomed out. I think if you go to the next slide, we can see some data around that. The three lines you're seeing here, the orange line shows consumer spending in Missouri and the changes since January. Green is retail with grocery, and purple is restaurants and hotels. And so you can see just the tremendous variation within different sectors of our economy. But one thing I would note is we really kind of returned to pre-COVID levels of consumer spending, again, which is a key driver of the economy. And for those who remember your economics 101 courses in high school and in college, you know that consumer spending makes up the lion's share of the GDP overall. And so when consumer spending for us returns to that pre-COVID level this summer, that was a really positive news for businesses, for the economy overall. And you can kind of see how that hovered really on a positive side for the better part of the summer and in the fall. And then as, again, the cases started to pile up again, you can see that it ticked back down. And right now we're at about -5% on consumer spending relative to January. So we're down 5% from where we started the year. But again, that restaurant and a hotel is a completely different story within that sector, 30% down, as everybody has changed behaviors. We're not going out to eat. We're shopping at home, or shopping and eating at home and things like that. So there's a lot of variation within our economy. But we look at this weekly, and you can see, again, the changes here. You can go to the next slide, please. Small businesses, this is kind of the same story here, but small businesses, the revenue has decreased by almost half since the start of the pandemic, or at the height of the pandemic, I should say. It was this is the trough, 46% down. If you go to the next slide, you can kind of see the data here a little bit more at granular level. It's a very similar story to consumer spending, as you might expect. The dark blue line in the middle is the total small business revenue for the state small businesses. But that leisure and hospitality sector, the very bottom line, is still down negative 53%. They were down almost 70%, just catastrophic for that sector early on. We'll talk a little bit later here today about some of the resources that we've put into the field to assist on these issues. But one of the key focus areas we've had, frankly, has been on the tourism sector because of what you're seeing right here. And in communities like Branson, certainly have felt the impacts of this at the height of it, of the recession, and back in the spring. One out of every four Missourians in Taney County, a quarter of the population was on unemployment at the height of the pandemic. They had 25% unemployment in Taney County, which is where Branson is, at the depths of this earlier this spring. So massive implications, not just for the economy certainly, but for people's lives and their livelihoods. And so it's just been a tremendous year for small businesses, and they've really weathered it as you go. So we'll continue to track on this. Again, I would note, as the virus has picked up, the lines for these measures has also gone down. I mean, it is almost a direct inverse of the virus chart and then the economic chart, two sides of the same coin, as we say. Can you go to the next slide, please? Similarly here, this is businesses that are open. So the last one was revenue, and it's a very strongly correlated here, of course, but we're still down about 20% of the total businesses have not returned. Total small businesses have not returned since January. And I'm personally, this is kind of my read on it at this point, but I think we're probably going to be hovering around this level until the vaccine, which is coming, of course, as we all know, but until that's widely distributed and widely available, I think we're going to continue to see this sort of hovering at this level as we've basically held here over the course of the pandemic as well. And then again, the latest trend downward here is not good. But again, as you see more restrictions coming in place, the virus surges, this has a direct effect on our state's economy as well. If you go to the next slide. So the last thing I'd note before I kind of talk a little bit about what are we kind of doing about all of this is one of the other metrics that we track is mobility. And so through data that's available publicly, it's actually online. You can get it, but you can see a direct cause and effect when the virus ticks up. Different policies are implemented at the local level. People's mobility drops off pretty rapidly, which means they're staying at home, they're not going out, which is exactly what we want, frankly, from a public health perspective, so they don't go out and spread the disease. But you can see it all play out. I would encourage you to take a look at, if you're at all interested in the data, showmestrong.mo.gov. We've got pretty much all the data sets that I walk through here, but also links to additional ones if you're at all interested in taking a look at that and spending some time on it on your own. Showmestrong.mo.gov. You can find a lot more to it, but it's really interesting to see kind of how this has played out. And we've really tried to follow the data as we've developed the state's response, both on the public health side, but also on the economic side. So if you can go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done so far this year to help try to help our private sector weather the storm and, frankly, to move forward beyond that. I know many of the folks on this call, not everybody certainly, but many of the organizations that are involved with MEI have interest in or work that you do that relates to broadband internet. And I think probably more than any event that we could have anticipated, we've all learned why and how internet access is just literally critical. It's now, we all know that, but I think this has shown it in every aspect of our lives, and probably exposed some of the weaker areas as it relates to broadband access and availability, but also just shows how truly dependent we are and forever will be on that. That Governor Parson, kind of in line with our prioritization on infrastructure development, has really looked at broadband internet as a key priority. We at the Department of Economic Development work very closely with our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture, and I know that Tim Arbeiter, who is the state's Director of Broadband Development on our team, has presented to this group before. But all told, we looked at about a $50 million injection of funding for broadband expansion, broadband access during the pandemic. These are using the state's CARES Act funding, and this does not include, what some local governments have done on their own. But we kind of looked at a perspective, not just kind of one piece of the puzzle here. Tried to be as broad, if you'll pardon the pun, as we possibly could be for expanding internet access and high-speed internet access. So the Emergency Broadband Investment Grant, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, is really to, kind of an extension of the state's broadband program prior to the pandemic, which was really helping to assist internet providers expand the infrastructure to underserved and unserved areas. But we also know that because of staffing issues or because of just the public health nature of the situation that our state is in, we needed to increase telehealth access. So you can see that we allocated funding to buy almost, over 12,000 hotspots for use at the federally qualified health centers and community medical centers to increase the opportunities for people to do telehealth checks. So you don't have to go to the doctor, cuts down on the travel certainly, but also enhances the opportunities for folks. Very same way with libraries. Libraries in many rural communities are kind of the central hub where people can go to get internet access if they don't have it readily available. And so we tried to expand their use of Wi-Fi enabled devices, laptops, hotspots and the like, to make those available in their communities. We also work very closely with our partners at DESE, the K-12 department, as well as higher ed, to make sure that our K-12 sector, as well as our universities and colleges, were able to get some funding assistance to expand and upgrade their capabilities. Obviously, that was a challenge before the pandemic, and we know certainly now we need those students to continue learning. My son is homeschooling this week, and I know that if we didn't have that internet access at our house, it'd be literally impossible for him to do that. I am very anxious for him to go back in person tomorrow, though, I'll tell you that. And then finally, we're also working with the U.S. Economic Development Administration for some additional grants for additional engineering studies and the like. Missouri has been fortunate. We have some outstanding congressional delegation members in D.C. Senator Roy Blunt, in particular, has been a tremendous leader for us in accessing federal funds. Missouri has received hundreds of millions of dollars, probably more than that actually when you add them all up, but in broadband funds. But we wanted to continue to pour resources into this as well. So this is just one piece of how we're doing that. If you could go to the next slide, please. This kind of gives you just a snippet of one of those programs. This is the one specifically for the provider awards. You can see a little bit of that map there. This is part of that $3.8 million for that. And then you can kind of see how it's distributed across the state. Go next slide. So zooming out from broadband, we've also tried to take a pretty comprehensive look at our economic relief programs. And if you heard the governor talk about this, we spent a fair amount of time in May really kind of outlining this publicly, and then have spent the months since then implementing and administering a lot of these programs. But we really targeted our economic recovery efforts on a couple of key pillars, if you want to call it that. Citizens, obviously, communities, and businesses. And we tried to target our assistance in those kind of three areas. We talked a little bit about the broadband already, but a key sector in the state's economy, but also just a key sector for delivering services to citizens and the public is our nonprofit community. And one of the things that we had to do early on as a result of the revenue situation and the pressures that were put on the state government and the state budget is we had to, basically stop utilizing some of our nonprofit and community development tax credit programs that DED administers. And so we wanted to offset the impact of that with some of these CARES Act funding. So we had a nonprofit relief and recovery program utilizing CARES Act funding to kind of plug that hole, $22 million, nearly 200 separate and individual nonprofit organizations. Same with co-working and incubators. So helping businesses start up. Missouri Technology Corporation was a key partner in this. $1 million to help companies and in incubators. So universities. There are other ones that have kind of these co-working spaces for businesses as well to kind of set up shop and start there. Wanted to provide some resources on that front. The legislature also set aside some funding for family-owned farms. Obviously, the Department of Agriculture is a great partner for our department, but it's also a key part of our state's economy, as everybody knows. And so we wanted to target some assistance to family-owned farms. PPE production is another really important one. One of the things, and the governor has talked about this quite a bit, is early in the pandemic, everybody knows how hard it was to get the PPE that we needed. It was partly because the demand was so increased, but also because of the disruptions in the supply chains, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so the governor really made a commitment to enhance our state's own production of PPE within Missouri. And so we created an incentive program to help manufacturers, Missouri manufacturers, start producing PPE if they were not able to do so before. They weren't even in that line of business before. So we had nearly 50 new manufacturers come online. They had to retool, they had to buy new equipment, and they're actively producing PPE. And the state, as a result of this, has been able to basically develop a stockpile of these critical medical supplies to help not just in the current pandemic, but to build up a stockpile if we need them again. Governor's key lesson here is that he was never going to be, reliant on foreign supply chains for this kind of critical public safety equipment, and wanted us to really target some resources here. So we did. Meat and poultry grant, meat and poultry processing grant. Obviously, these companies, if you remember back to kind of midsummer or late spring, there were very serious concerns about the availability of protein within our food supply. And it was because these organizations were having tremendous difficulties keeping workers in. They were having folks go down. They had to really retool their entire plants in order to keep workers safe. And if they went down, then literally we would be in jeopardy of not having food. And obviously that is a challenge for a variety of reasons. But it was teetering on the edge back at that point. And I know it's in retrospect, things have kind of, they've worked out in many ways, but at the time it was teetering on the edge. There were, where there was very serious concern about, producers who were going to have to slaughter their hogs because there was nowhere to get them processed and things like that. And so the Department of Agriculture has put some resources into that to help these meat and poultry processors really beef up that side of it. The last two that I want to mention here, because I think they're really important to our economy, is the Tourism Destination Marketing Organization grant. Just about, everybody on this call lives in a county or lives in an area that has a tourism organization, and they're primarily charged with marketing and advertising for your community or for our state's tourism economy. You saw in the data just on small businesses alone, the impact that this has had on small businesses, revenue, as well as consumer behavior. But the tourism economy is critically important to our state. What we wanted to do was to make sure that travelers knew that there were ways to come to Missouri to spend tourism dollars, but to do so safely. And so what we did was we focused our marketing efforts in the Division of Tourism and with our Convention and Visitors Bureau partners locally to try to market these opportunities to come and do it safely. So, for example, instead of coming to a large venue, come to one of the state parks in the area and enjoy safely outside. We also provided some funding for, PPE equipment and materials for events that needed it. And then finally, the Small Business Grant Program. We had just a tremendous interest in this program, as you could imagine. 800 some odd small businesses that are vying for the $22 million that were available. And we have about a week and a half left for these programs to be wrapped up. As you may know, the Federal CARES Act is set to expire. The funding is set to go away on December 30th. So we're literally right at the end of that time. And so teams all across state government, certainly within our department, DED, are furiously reviewing applications and going back and forth with applicants to try to get those funds out the door to the people that need them. And so it's a flurry of activity, but these are the main core programs that we've enacted on the CARES Act side. Again, it's really developed to plug the holes that were left by the pandemic and really to assist those folks that were in greatest need. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a measure here that I wanted to share with you. Really has nothing to do with the CARES Act or the pandemic itself, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of where we're at in terms of our overall economic development activity. So we call them projects, but these are companies that are actively looking at relocating or expanding in our state at any given time that we're working with. So it obviously doesn't capture all economic activity, but it captures the ones that are working with an economic development organization. And we're basically double where we were at last year in terms of the active opportunities looking at creating jobs and creating capital investment in our state. You can see the numbers of jobs here and the number of capital investment, but we're literally double, in some cases more than that from last year. And so one of the things that we've seen, which it was kind of surprising and almost surreal as we went throughout the year, but there were a fair number of these projects that were initiated during the pandemic. And we kind of thought that, we'd maybe, work on a couple of them that we're finishing up, or, we're at that point where they were able to weather the storm, but surely there'd be no new interest and things would dry up on that front. But actually, to the contrary, we've seen increased interest in the state. One key sector in particular that you may have seen some announcements in the news are in kind of like the e-commerce and distribution facilities. We announced a project with over 1,000 jobs in Belton, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City, for Chewy.com, which is a direct e-tailer for pet food. They're the largest pet product, pet care, pet store type online presence in the entire world. But they have a distribution center now in the Kansas City area. Amazon announced a 1 million square foot distribution center in Republic, which is in Greene County, just outside of Springfield. And so we've seen some changes in the projects that we're working on, but manufacturing projects are still very, very strong, as well as these distribution opportunities as well. We've not had any, as you can imagine, back office or office or corporate office setting type companies that have initiated during the pandemic. And I think it still remains to be seen what happens when people aren't going to the office and they're working from home, like I am and many of the people on the call are right now. And so we'll see what the dynamics are in that regard and what the long-term implications are. But I wanted to show you this because I think this is a really encouraging slide for us. This is our project pipeline. None of these have announced yet; they're still in the works. But when your warm leads and hot leads, to use a sales metaphor, when you've got more of them, you're going to be able to convert more to the close. And so I'm excited about that, and it's really showing some strength. You can go to the last couple slides here. I'll wrap up and be happy to take any questions. I wanted to share this as well because one of the things that our team has really been focused on this year, economic development professionals at DED have been asked to do many things that go far, far afield of economic development. And we've been working very closely with other agencies and state government, with our partners in the Department of Health and others, to really help our state respond, not just to the economic side, which is what you'd probably expect us to be working on, but we've also been engaged on the public health side. So our team has put together what we call the Show Me You Care campaign. Hopefully you've seen it. If you've listened to streaming radio, Pandora, Spotify, those kind of things, maybe you've seen some billboards, but we've really tried to target some of these messages to our greatest risk or highest need type populations, folks who might not otherwise encounter some of these public health messages. But we've been putting this out. Would encourage you, if you're at all interested, to take a look at these and how your industry or your organization can get involved. But showmestrong.mo.gov. You can engage with us more. But I just really wanted to show you this because I'm proud of our team. We've used our team's economic development marketing expertise and put it to a public health angle. So If you can go to the next slide. And I think this is my last slide. I wanted to wrap up with something that we've all been waiting for the better part of a year now, which is the vaccine. And so you all know this, I'm sure, but we are anticipating the arrival of the batch of the vaccine here very soon. The governor has talked about this. We're expecting to initiate our phase 1 of this, the vaccine rollout here shortly. Wanted to point you in the direction. We've got a website at the very bottom here, mostopscovid.com. mostopscovid.com. This is the state of Missouri's vaccine distribution plan, and you can see that we've included essential categories here. Energy workers are considered to be in that initial phase, the initial prioritization, because of obviously the work that you do is so critical to keeping the lights on, literally and figuratively, in our economy. And so if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, please do. We're also planning some public information efforts over the next few days into next week that will talk a little bit more about this to some of the early phase organizations. So much more to come on this. I did want to highlight this and make sure that you were aware of the website if you had some questions about it. But a really resource that is put out by our public health team, what I think answers a lot of the questions and tries to dispel a lot of the myths and rumors about the vaccine. Like, for example, no one is going to be putting a chip or anything like that in your body. It's truly a vaccine for the virus. And so there's all kinds of information on there, including some of those, those greatest hit rumors and myths to be dispelled in case anybody's interested in some of those. But please do check out. There's some implications certainly for your industry, and I want to make sure that you're aware of it. And we'll be happy to get the word out as well early next week about the availability of those information sessions and webinars that we'll be having on the vaccine itself. So that's the update that I have for you today. I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much for the support that you have shown to our state government team as an organization, but also thanks so much for the individual members of MEI for your support over the course of this year. It's been a challenging year on a variety of fronts, but I am proud of the men and women that work at the State Department of Economic Development. I hope you are too. And you should be proud of them because they get up every day and want to do what they can to serve you and serve you better. So thanks for your support, but I'd be happy to take any questions or discuss anything further that you'd like, Josh, with the remaining time that we have.
I appreciate that, Rob. Thank you. You never disappoint. Always great information. I greatly appreciate it. And no, this has not been an easy year for anybody, and especially when the economy's been taking a hit. I know you guys have been working overtime trying to keep Missouri moving. There have been a number of great successes this year within your own department and with the Missouri Partnership, and who I know you work with to bring in new companies even during this time. So thank you. And you're right there. Our board is very supportive of the work you do, and will continue to be. And don't ever hesitate to reach out to us if we can be of help.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions that have come in so far, and I'll be honest, all the questions I had that I wanted to ask you, you hit on. So I think that's great. I guess when you look at the broadband part, the announcement came in with the funding. In your mind, how quickly, what's the timeline to be able to get that out there, where you're getting shovels in the ground type thing?
Yeah, and hopefully we put out some information that the Department of Agriculture did as well on that, and I know Senator Blunt's office put that out. That's the most recent, the FCC announcement on it. But the funds that we're putting out for the CARES Act dollars, they're going out now. Most of those are already out because of the timelines that we've got. So we're wrapping that up, and then we'll shift over to that. Actually, the FCC, the federal government, will be the ones that are administering those dollars. We hope to see those in the field soon. We'll look at, we're getting ready to start in January with the legislative session ahead of us, and I'm sure broadband funding will be another topic of discussion, as it always is. in the state's budget again. And so the state, through DED, we've had a $5 million broadband grant program that we did have to, pause because of budget concerns. And so it's, funding is going to be a challenge going forward. The thing that I think we have to look at is like, what's the right mix between federal and state funds? I want to make sure, that if the state of Missouri is getting a significant amount of federal funds, that we're not kind of overlapping. And that's been a lot of what the work that Tim Arbeiter has been doing, is to make sure that they're targeted to those communities that are not receiving the federal dollars. So there's a lot that goes into that. I know it's a long-winded answer to a short question, but the CARES Act dollars, that's where our priority is right now, to get those out within the next 2 weeks, basically.
So we did have one question here from Eleni Bickle, and that is, which action would be most beneficial economically for Missourians if funding was not a constraint?
So at the risk of sounding like I'm pandering to my boss, the governor, it's continuing to, double down on workforce development and infrastructure. Likes to talk about, new incentive programs and kind of those types of things. But if we really focus on training workers and attracting new people to come here and retaining our talent, solving that workforce issue, the skills and availability piece is like job number one. And it's really a lot of why we targeted the reorganization of state government that happened about 1.5 years ago with the Department of Higher Ed and our department around that. And then, infrastructure is going to continue to be, I think, the big thorny funding problem that we have as a state have to look at. There's upgrades that need to happen. There's new technologies that are being implemented. There's just maintenance and upkeep of existing, and I'm talking the gamut of the infrastructure. Obviously energy infrastructure, but road transportation, rivers, ports, all of those things. And so those are the two areas, the two pillars that we have to focus on. Missouri has a long history of being a pro-growth, pro-jobs, kind of low regulation, low cost, low risk state. And that has actually served us well in terms of being a place that's attractive for business. But we have to continue to focus on those two pillars. Like I said, the one thing that we've been looking at is where do we stack up relative to our competitor states. And we really were falling behind over the last decade or so. The silver lining, and I hate to even say it like this, but the silver lining, if there is one, in terms of the economic trauma that's happening this year, is that Missouri is leapfrogging ahead of other states. When we're 16th in the nation in jobs recovery, that positions us much farther down the line than a lot of the other states around us. And if we can capitalize on, again, the relative position between us and some of our other states, it's going to help us into the future. And again, I feel kind of ghoulish talking about it like that, but we do need to capitalize on the opportunity that Missouri has. And I think if we stay focused on workforce and infrastructure, we'll be in good shape.
Well, Rob, thank you for all that you're doing. Keep up the great work. Keep us in mind if we can be of any help. But thank you for
likewise. Thank you so much. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Take care.